Hi friends, once again I'm here with an interesting topic, and today I'll be talking on an important issues in global politics, and it's about Tibetan issue. We know very well that in the post-World War II period, Tibet has always been at the hem of affairs, and once again the Dalai Lama is in news. China states that selection of the Dalai Lama is not something within the ambit of religion. However, the opinion of the Dalai Lama is different on this subject. On the other side, the Dalai Lama has said, in retaliation of Chinese claims, that his reincarnation and successor would be found freely. There would be no role of China in the process of reincarnation. Here originates the two different stands simultaneously on the successor of the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama has made confirmation about the reincarnation. However, there is no confirmation of place and timings. This must irritate China, as the Dalai Lama has made it clear that China should stay away from the religious matters. It's important that the Dalai Lama on July 6 was on at 90 years. He turned 90 years of age on July 6. Really high time. This is for the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama, which is long expected and debated. Today we will talk on the Dalai Lama in the context of Indo-China relations in particularly. Last year, when a delegation from the United States visited Dharamshala and met the Dalai Lama, these belonged to the House of Representatives of US Congress. The 7 members delegation included Nancy Pelosi as well. In the delegation, Nancy Pelosi was also a part. They also had raised the issue of Tibetan autonomy. I'm talking about the delegation raised the issue of Tibetan autonomy last year. One of the most important remarks of this delegation was a strong message to China, which needed to stay away from this matter. Whenever the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama becomes an issue, this attracts the whole world. Let's need to go to details to understand what the issue is all about and how various interests are associated with this issue. India got freedom in 1947, and communism was established in China on October 1st, 1949. This was the time when Pandit Nehru was the Prime Minister of India. He is criticized for not having played a constructive role on the issue of Tibet. Pandit Nehru believed that if India accepts Chinese stand on Tibet, this would facilitate harmonious relations between the two countries. Professor Dawa Norbu writes in an article, Tibet in Sino-Indian Relations. He says the centrality of marginality in 1997, that the issue of Tibet has been ignored. Still, the same has affected the Indo-China relations significantly. Dr. Ravi Prasad Narayanan also discusses Tibet in the context of India. He says that Tibet is an important facet of Indo-China relations. Lodi Gilles Ten Gyari, who is the special representative of the Dalai Lama, says that anyone who has basic knowledge of geopolitics of India, Tibet and China knows very well the significance of Tibet in this context. Gary also comments that India's approach towards Tibet has been extra cautious and full of appeasement towards China. The same is mentioned by the Economic Times in 2008. Lalit Mansingh, who was the Foreign Secretary of India from 1999 to 2000, says that accepting Chinese stand on Tibet was the Nehruvian approach, which was dismantled on the Chinese attack in 1962. Professor Norbu further says that the efforts to bring India and China closer in the initial years actually sacrificed the issue of Tibet. On the other side, Arunab Ghosh considers that the 1962 development cannot be the central idea forever. We need to go beyond that too. Arunab Ghosh appears to be pragmatic in his approach when Rajiv Gandhi became the first Prime Minister of India after 1962 to visit China in 34 years in 1988 after the clashes of 1962 on the McMahon line between India and China. Tibet no doubt is important for India, but India's long-term interest is also with China, no doubt. We may criticize Pandit Nehru for not being realistic in dealing with China on the issue of Tibet, but he tried his best to protect India's interest during Cold War. Professor Norbu goes on to say that whether it's the trip of Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi in 1988 or Li Peng's visit to India, China showed its determination that Tibet is an important issue for China. Let's also discuss some of the background that would make the topic very clear. Actually, when we talk about the history of Tibet, we conclude that China has always been trying to show that Tibet has always been the part of China, but this is not the story. Story is different. China is known to have made several claims on the ground of history. In the South China Sea too, the verdict of International Court was not in favor of China, and the same is in case of Tibet as well. China claims that Tibet to be its a part on the basis of history for thousands of years. On the other side, Tibet has been under the control of China and Mongolia. This territory was also autonomous from time to time in the past as well. Tibetan history is architectured within these 3 points: Chinese occupation as well as the occupation of Mongolia, and sometimes Tibet also remained autonomous in the past centuries, so many centuries. In 1950, China assaulted Tibet comprehensively. Some parts of Tibet were included in mainland China and some was left as autonomous. During Cultural Revolution in China, Tibet had to be at the bolt from the blue at its religious places. Reality was that China had rare control on Tibet in the past, and when the Mongol king Kublai Khan laid the foundation of Yuan dynasty, he occupied many territories including Tibet. The mighty Qing dynasty tried to control Tibet, but because of the stiff resistance from the Tibetan people, it couldn't last for long. In 1912, the Dalai Lama proclaimed the independence of Tibet, but in 1951, China occupied Tibet and get the documents of sovereignty signed by the Tibetan officials forcefully. This was not enough for China. Very soon, China raised restrictions to cut off Tibet from the rest of the world. Professor Pushpesh Pant, in his famous book International Relations, writes that Tibet remained free in the last 2 millennia before the arrival of Chinese there. This land of 21 lakhs square kilometer territory is known for its distinctive features. Professor Pant goes on to say that Buddhism from India reached Tibet and made it a reason of strong relations between India and China. In fact, India guided Tibet spiritually. India has been called Arya Bhumi in the Tibetan literature. Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia also believed that Tibet is in proximity to India as compared to China. India always recognized Tibet. According to the 1950 agreement, it was anticipated that China would recognize Tibet, but it never happened. When we talk about the Dalai Lama and his significance, let's discuss who the Dalai Lama is. Let's go to the background to understand him comprehensively. Actually, it means a teacher. When we talk about the Dalai Lama is not a person, but it's a position, a spiritual, religious position. And the meaning of Dalai Lama is a teacher who guides the right path to move on. Tsongkhapa had established a school which was called Gelep, and the school was established in 1409 AD. The Gelep school played a big role in popularizing the Buddhism in Tibet. Kendun Drug belonged to this very Gelep school. Druk became the first Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama played an important role in the unification of various factions in Tibet who were actually not united, and they were fighting with one another. There were severe differences among these factions in the Tibetan territory. But Druk played a big role in the unification of these factions within the Tibet. The fifth Dalai Lama unified Tibet, and the 13th Dalai Lama announced the territory as free land. China intruded Tibet in the post-World War II period and dismantled its values to save life and faith. The then Dalai Lama, along with his thousands of followers, came to India. This was disliked by Mao at that time. He didn't like the Tibetans, people who were suppressed by the Chinese extreme policies, brutalities. They ran away to the safer places, and Mao didn't like this at all. And the exiles got world sympathy due to atrocities they were Tibetans, they were inflicted upon. In 1989, the Dalai Lama was conferred the Nobel Peace Prize for his peaceful struggle for his very right, that was freedom. And Tibetan Indo-China relations, when we talk about the issue of Tibet in the Indo-China relations, we need to take a very comprehensive approach on this. Yes, the issue of Tibet has affected the Indo-China relations significantly. The Panchashila was signed by India and China in 1954, and it mentions that none of the countries, whether China or India, would interfere in the internal affairs. But Tibet is not an internal issue of China. The palm and five fingers theory of Mao manifests the true mindset of the Chinese towards Tibet. This theory says if China is a hand, Tibet is so-called palm, and five fingers are Ladakh, Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh. As per the 1950 agreement, China was anticipated to respect the autonomy of Tibet, but China didn't do that. India has been standing with one China policy, which means that even Tibet and Taiwan are the parts of China. This is right from the days of Pandit Nehru. India recognized Tibet as an autonomous region of China in 2003 when Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee visited China. In this visit, India also recognized the Dalai Lama as a religious leader and said that no activity against China would take place in Indian territory. But when the Tibetan religious people tried to set themselves on fire in Tibet, China raised finger to India. Once a great leader and India's Defense Minister Shri Mulayam Singh Yadav ji had said in Parliament that recognizing Tibet as the part of China was not in the interest of India, and it was a historical blunder. And that was a big compromise on India's interest. Once a great leader, basically, when he says that was a blunder, of course, so many other scholars have also criticized this particular stand of India towards Tibet. So that's important. Pandit Nehru recognized Tibet as a part of China only for 8 years. That is also very important for us to understand, and Mr. Vajpayee did not decide the time limit for the same. The 1962 attack stopped recognizing Tibet as a part of China, and this was the stand of India in 2003. Till 2003, when Vajpayee visited China. However, China also recognized Sikkim as the part of India in that visit. So we find no doubt that Tibet is an important issue, and it also affects Indo-China relations significantly. There is a criticism of Nehruvian stand on India's policy towards Tibet, and of course critics call it the appeasement to China. That appeasing China on the ground of Tibetan, on the ground of Tibetan domination by Chinese authorities, by China, would facilitate a smooth relationship between India and China. But this didn't happen, because in 1962 the assault actually proves that something wrong was there, and no appropriate policies were made, no suitable policies were made which could actually determine the relationship between India and China, and this was accepting Chinese control on Tibet was of course historical blunder, no doubt about. But there are scholars who also believe that even in the later decades also, India's stand has not been very clear, and this ambiguity has affected not only the Tibetan issue but also the relationship between India and China. So the time has gone, and it's 13th of July today. On Monday last, we saw the Dalai Lama celebrating his 90th birthday, and we expect that something more would take place in this context, and the issue would continue until all the stakeholders exercise substantial strength to sort out this particular issue. Thank you so much for listening to me.